We are here to discuss zoning location for medical marijuana dispensary and other options. If I could have the clerk please call the roll.
Chairman Hong.
Here.
Councilor Leahy.
Here.
Councilor Martin. Here. 3 present.
Thank you. If council would like to make some comment.
Well, sure. If I could just recap what brought us here. I guess originally, maybe I don't know if it was maybe even last year, but after the special legislation had been adopted, the DPD had forwarded to us, to the council, a proposed ordinance to restrict, somehow put some regulations in place for what was defined as a medical marijuana treatment center. We referred that matter on to the planning board for review and recommendation, and we got back this letter to the council February 1st this year from Aaron Clausen, senior planner, with some comments from members of the planning board. They declined to adopt the proposed ordinance or even make a recommendation about it, and asked the council to consider some modifications, specifically that we eliminate this use in regional retail and suburban mixed-use areas. So that was back in February. At that, we had a meeting shortly after that. It was decided there was no real urgency about this matter. We had a 500-foot buffer zone in our proposed ordinance around schools. After that February 1st memo, we got another proposed outline here from DPD, what it would look like with a 1,000-foot buffer zone, because the council had expressed some interest in the 1,000-foot buffer zone. So we've had that since February. And then most recently, I guess, I have this memo, which I don't see a date on, but it was within the last month, where DPD was growing concern. The state was about to adopt regulations and urged the council to schedule a meeting soon. We didn't really want to have these things coming into any zoning district unregulated. And so that's what's brought us here to this meeting tonight. Now, I understand just from an earlier conversation this afternoon with Mr. Bakey that the state's regulations have imposed a number of the things the council was seeking to do. So I'd be, certainly if other councilors want to be heard on this, they should, but at some point I think we should hear from Mr. Bakey about what the state regulations provide and how that fits in with our existing zoning scheme, and whether any action is really necessary. Or we may have this, I think, regulated well enough as it is, but we should have that discussion. So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman. I just thought it'd be helpful to summarize what's occurred to date, and certainly if others have anything to add, then all ears.
Thank you, Councilor Mann, for the update. Councilor Leahy, any comment to this matter?
I'm all set right now. That was a good summary, so I'll let Mr. Bakey go.
Yes, Mr. Bakey, would you like to take on the mic?
Sure. Good evening, members of the council. I thought Councilor Martin's introduction was a good summary of where things stand. I think just to follow up on that, I think the city administration and the city council, I think like many communities, reacted to the passage of this ballot measure last fall, recognizing that this was something where it may turn out to be a new land use, and there was a need to think about how we might approach this from a zoning perspective in terms of where we might like to see these cited and any kind of zoning related criteria about the facilities themselves. But we were acting, I think, fairly quickly in reaction to again, the passage of the ballot measure, without the benefit of having at that time seen what the state's Department of Public Health was going to issue in terms of their own regulations. And I think it's, I think we're fortunate that it appears that the Massachusetts Department of Public Health took a very thoughtful and thorough perspective on this matter, and promulgated over 52 pages of regulations of the nature of how this new medicine, I guess, or new to Massachusetts medicine will be managed in the state. There's a substantial amount of information about how one becomes a patient, how one, what the physicians need to do in terms of prescribing the marijuana. But there also is a fair amount of regulation of the facilities themselves. And I imagine that the council is particularly interested in the dispensaries, which would be the facilities where individuals who have a prescription for medical marijuana would be able to go to obtain the medical marijuana. And I imagine that's the type of facility that is, I guess, most of interest with respect to regulation, and that certainly is what we were all collectively, I believe, thinking about when we drafted the draft zoning amendment. Interestingly, it does appear that the state has addressed the vast majority of the items that we identified as areas of particular concern that we thought should be regulated through a zoning amendment. So I think we're fortunate that that the state seems to be of like mind with the city in that respect. For example, the regulations around the prescription of the marijuana, as well as the qualifying as a patient, I think really address the fact that there would need to be a demonstrated need, which was one of the things we identified as a concern. We identified the need for a secure indoor waiting area for clients, and the state regulations are actually extremely detailed with respect to security of the product, with respect to who can get into what parts of the facility under what circumstances, how the product can be stored, displayed, managed, really from seed all the way to the final products that it is dispensed in. Is regulated in some detail by the state, which is, I think, a very good thing. But they do also talk quite a bit about the nature of the security of the facility itself, and I think we're fairly well covered there, although I wouldn't, if the council wishes to adopt any specific zoning on this matter, I wouldn't take these things out necessarily. But again, if the council chooses not to take any specific action, I do believe we're well covered. They also, again, we had a proposal that we wanted to see adequate security measures to ensure that individual participants will not pose direct threat to the health and safety of other individuals, and the storage and or location of cultivation of marijuana is adequately secured in locked facilities. Again, the state regulations are very strong in that area. The state does not particularly address issues of traffic demand, parking, and queuing. We would, even in the absence of any other regulation through the special permit process, or if a facility qualified and met any of the requirements for site plan review, the planning board would also address those matters elsewhere in our zoning code. But again, if we want to specifically address this use, those probably should remain. There is a statement that in the state regulations that signage needs to comply with local regulations, which is essentially what our proposed 71036 would have done. There is nothing in the state regulations that creates the 5,000-foot buffer between medical marijuana facilities. That if we were interested in regulating the dispensaries in such a way as to separate them, that is something that, again, we had proposed that is not in the state regulations. The state regulations do include, in the absence of any local regulation, a requirement that the medical marijuana facilities be 500 feet from any, in their case, they use the term school, daycare center, or any facility in which children commonly congregate, which is a little bit different. We had proposed public or private elementary school, middle school, secondary school, or public library. We also identified that we would not want to see a medical marijuana facility on the same property as a licensed pharmacy. And the state regulations do require that these be independent facilities, so I think that is fairly well addressed. The state does go into great detail. We have a whole discussion of signage, and the state does go into pretty significant detail around signage. It's not exactly the same as the rules we proposed, but I think the intent is similar in terms of keeping the product specifically as a medical product, not a sort of recreational product, and making sure that the product is not marketed to children in any way. I think that essentially was the intent of our proposed regulation of signage and marketing, which again, the state has done a fairly good job with that as well. So in essence, I think we are fortunate that, again, the state did a very thorough job. There are definitely areas where we could complement that if we wish, in terms of regulating the dispensaries. I would also point out that if the council chooses to take no action on any specific regulation of medical marijuana dispensaries, the current zoning would treat them as what we would define as an other healthcare facility. And the other healthcare facility is currently allowable in a handful of zoning districts, but only by special permit. There is nowhere in the city where an other healthcare facility is allowed by right. So anyone who was interested in proposing a medical marijuana dispensary would need to, at minimum, even if the council takes no action, would need to see the zoning board and have a public hearing with proper notice given to all abutters within 300 feet. In addition to the special permit requirement, obviously they would be subject to all other zoning requirements, and in addition, they would be subject to that state buffering of 500 feet from any school or place where children are known to congregate.
Could I?
Thank you. You have anything else? Okay, Councilor Martin, you have any comment? Councilor Reed, Mercy?
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question through you to Adam Beggy. Maybe you can explain the reasoning to me, because I don't understand this. Why would they not want any facility, any marijuana facility near a licensed pharmacy? What is the reasoning there? I would have thought that they would have wanted it not only near it, but in it. I don't understand that.
Well, it's interesting that I can tell you, I can't explain what the state's logic, other than they seem to want to treat these, because I think of the security of the product, they want to treat these as independent facilities, independent of any other use for the most part, not specific to the issue of the pharmacy. The reason the separation from the pharmacy was put into our proposed ordinance was at the request of the then police chief. And he had identified a specific concern that the legalization of medical marijuana would either exacerbate or create a parallel problem in the community with the problem that he recognizes of the abuse of prescription medications, particularly prescription pain medications. And by separating them from a pharmacy where those are dispensed, at least it created, one potential separation of the two possible abuse situations. Now, I think one of the things I have personally learned from some of the folks that are proposing or exploring medical marijuana facilities in Massachusetts was the observation that medical marijuana in the states where it has been legal is generally prescribed for the same conditions that those prescription painkillers are prescribed for. And in fact, that there may be, although no one could provide me with any specific data, their suggestion, again, this is coming from the advocates, their suggestion is that if there is any relationship between the two, and there may not be, but if there is, it's likely that the availability of medical marijuana for the same conditions would actually reduce the amount of prescription pain medicine that's prescribed. And that hopefully would have a positive and not a negative impact on the amount of those prescription pain medicines that may be available for abuse on the street or find their way into inappropriate hands. But it doesn't seem like it's...
Personally, I don't buy any of that. I would think that if you were abusing the medical marijuana and then getting your Oxycontin or whatever pain medicine, then they could clearly see that. But to have it separate, you don't know what one thing is doing from the other. So I don't buy their reasoning, but it's not about what I think, it's what they think, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mercia. Councilor Elliott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Bakey, At the end of your comments, you indicated should the council choose not to do anything, then these or this facility would have the opportunity to go for special permit in the category of other healthcare zoning. Do you know how many zoning areas there are categorized under this particular other healthcare? How many parcels?
I don't know specifically how many parcels, and I can tell you that it is, I can identify the zoning districts where it's allowable by special permit. That's the suburban mixed use, the regional retail, the traditional mixed use, the neighborhood business, the urban mixed use, the downtown mixed use, the high-rise commercial, the institutional, and the office park are the areas where an other healthcare facility is allowed by special permit. Now, however, it is important to note that that does not take into account the 500-foot buffer from any public school. We did provide the council previously with a map showing what the buffers around the existing public schools in the city would be, and I've got some copies of that if anyone would like. That would, I think, it pretty dramatically reduces the areas of the city where one of these facilities could potentially be located.
So the recommendation at this point is, are we just still in the discussion phase? There's really been no definitive proposal?
Yeah, honestly, the only reason I brought up the idea of doing nothing is that seems to be the action that's been taken so far.
Right.
And the one thing I would point out is that in the event that the council wishes to enact regulations, either the ordinance that was previously proposed or a different ordinance or modified version thereof, it would need to begin the process of a new advertised public hearing, because too much time has lapsed since the previous public hearing closed without action by the council for the council to enact the zoning without a new public hearing.
So I guess the reason for my question is there are many communities, or there are some communities, I don't know exactly how many, that are choosing to enact a moratorium for a one-year time frame, which is allowed under the law or according to the Attorney General. So does it make some sense? And I would support a year moratorium because of the issues that we've been deliberating for the last number of months. And of course, if the council does decide to do that or entertain it, that means we'd have to provide the reasoning for such a moratorium. But it does give communities, and I think a number of communities are or have enacted a moratorium, time to, particularly a city like Lowell, where 500 buffer, that definitely restricts the number of areas. However, based on this map, and I appreciate it, there are still many areas, if we did nothing, where an applicant could apply for a permit. So, I mean, I would advocate that we enact a moratorium. Give us a year's time. Let's see exactly what this, how this law is going to play out. Because at this point, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, nonprofit organizations can begin the process of submitting an application. Is that correct? As of the 30th?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact date, but yes, I believe that process is beginning. The one thing I would caution with respect to a moratorium is I attended a presentation at the Massachusetts Association of Planning Directors where it was explained that the 1 year that the Attorney General said was allowable with respect to moratoria, it is not clear whether that means 1 year from when a community chooses to enact one, or 1 year from when the ballot measure passed. And in fact, it seems likely that it's actually the latter. So we would be able to enact a moratorium at least through November, but not if you were to adopt one and after the proper zoning process, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to enact one for a full year from whenever you adopted it at this point. And the reasoning behind that is that I think the position that the Attorney General was taking was that there were a lot of unknowns, which was certainly the case for us as well. Those unknowns are becoming clarified, and there's less basis for enacting a moratorium as the more information that is available. The state has now promulgated their regulations. We have had a fair amount of time to study the issue. So I can't say for sure that we wouldn't be able to enact a moratorium for a full year, but we might be limited in that respect, and that's something our law department would need to review with the state before we brought something forward to the council, if that were the wish of the council.
No, that's, I mean, I think as this continues to evolve and we do get some additional clarification, I think it makes some sense until to enact a moratorium, until, why be a community? I mean, this is also in, I think it's going to be, there are legal issues still being addressed, and even, the Mass Municipal Association, the executive director, he supports communities putting a moratorium in effect until communities can really come up with good solutions, sound solutions from a zoning perspective to make sure that these RMDs are not located in an area that's not appropriate. So knowing there's still a level of uncertainty, that's the reason why I suggest it, and whether it's from the time the ballot question was or not, I guess that is certainly a variable that we'd have to look at, but I just suggest it because there is, to me, a fair amount of uncertainty as to, where they can go, what zoning ordinance we're going to put in place. So, I watched the tape, the City of Boston in 2012, last year in November. They held a hearing on this. They had, police departments, they had police commanders say, come in and say, in these locations, you should be aware that you'll require an increased police presence depending upon the location. So the more I look into this, the more I read about it, the more it might make some sense to, and we're not violating the law. There are provisions in the law for communities to put this in place for the purpose of what we're discussing here. And I know we haven't delayed. I know there have been numerous reports, but it might make some sense to enact something like this until we get our hands around it and make sure we put the right ordinance in place. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Elliott. All right, any other comment from the council before I open to the public? All right, Mr. Clerk, anyone registered to speak on this?
No.
All right, I will open to the public. If you would come up and please state your name and your address, if you may, and speak your mind, but you have 3 minutes.
Oh, it's going to be hard for me to be brief, but I will. Hi, I'm Kirsten Doherty. I live at 16 Summit Street in Lowell. I'm glad that I'm having the opportunity to be able to talk to you today briefly. I have been learning about this issue, educating myself, and part of the group opposing this. And the law has been passed, granted. It's the will of the people. So I think now, for me, it's not so much about the state and the DPH having these strict regulations in place. And granted, the regulations are strict. They did a really great job in terms of listening to the public and to the people that were concerned on both sides of the issue. But to Councilor Elliott's point, in terms of the increased law enforcement that would be needed, I think there's some other issues to be considered beyond that, which is also the fact that with people that have gone through the process of having a certified physician in terms of a registration card, those personal caregivers that will receive registration cards, my concern is that the different municipal departments and the different organizations, the schools, will also need to be looking at policies and procedures to address some of the issues that may come up as a result of having dispensary, or if not, having residents, even those that are under 18, with these medical marijuana registration cards. So I think really the moratorium, and that's why I'm up here to talk about it and be in support of it, is to really give the community as a whole and the departments and all an opportunity to really look at this and to be sure that we're fully prepared. I would really hate to have issues arise without the community being prepared. You know, there are policies when it comes to the school in terms of students with medical marijuana registration cards. What does that mean in terms of the school's chemical health policies? Employers in terms of having people with medical marijuana ID cards, how do they address that in the workplace? And I think it's just really in the best interest of the community to look at that. Hardship cultivation, those folks that are going to be doing that have hardships and are going to be able to cultivate with a personal caregiver at home, we have to consider that. There will be people growing marijuana throughout the community, not just these dispensaries. I wanted to make one more point. The Greater Lowell Health Alliance has many task forces, as you're aware. One of them is the Substance Use and Prevention Task Force. A subcommittee has just been put together to look at the issue of medical marijuana in Lowell and to be able to educate ourselves and look more closely at what some of the policies and procedures are that the community should be addressing, and also helping to educate our physicians about what this means in terms of a community, in terms of the impact on the community. And there are several communities that have had the moratorium approved, or in the process of having it approved, Tewksbury, Billerica, a lot of communities. So they're all of the like mind that the communities, it's in the best interest of the community to be more prepared for the possibility of the dispensary and more people holding registrations. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. All right, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
My name's Eileen Kenny. I live at 140 Stedman. And I'd just like to say, as far as this is concerned, I think that it's been proven with the issues with the methadone clinic that has been recently in the news. And I was here about that because that's actually very close to my home. I think that I agree with, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Mr. Elliott. I agree with him that I think that it makes sense to wait until more studies can be done about how it's going to affect the community to find out what the proper zoning is for this type of facility, since it's new to the state. And since there are so many drug issues in the city, I think that maybe this isn't the right time to bring it into the city. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Don't be shy. All right, Councilor Elliott. Sorry.
Well, to you, Mr. Chairman, in response to the lady that just spoke, maybe we would never want to have it here, but people voted and said that they wanted it here. So in a democracy, the majority rules, and they voted that they wanted it, so we have to have it. So we will have it. It's not that we want to, but the law tells us that we have to do that. So
Right, I completely understand and agree. I just think that it's, I agree with Mr. Elliott that we just need to make sure that we're putting it in the right zone.
okay.
All right. Well, I just want to echo Councilor Mercier's, that is that we cannot regulate it out. We have the option of trying to have regulation in place, or to do nothing and let the state DPH regulation, which according to Mr. Backey, that is very firm and very detailed, run its course. With that regulations, they still have to come before Zoning Board of Appeal for special permit, as does or did the methadone clinic, or the suggestion that Councilor Elliott proposed, that is moratorium, giving the council and the community a year to get more information on these matters. So we have three options on the table right now, but let me return it to Councilor Elliott. Councilor Elliott.
No, I just want to follow up. I understand that the will of the people, it was the question passed 63%. But my question, I guess my thought is, it's not necessarily a done deal that it has to come in the city of Lowell. It's not a done deal that it's going to go in the city of Boston or these major metropolitan areas. The law is written that there's up to 35 dispensaries approved. There has to be at least one in each of the counties. There's 14 counties in Massachusetts. There are 62 cities and towns in Middlesex County. So my point is, and there can be up to 5, no more than 5 per county. So Lowell doesn't necessarily have to be one of those. I mean, I think communities like Tewksbury, Billerica, and others, they're putting moratoriums in place because they want some time to make sure whatever zoning ordinance they put in place, and it is going to be a zoning ordinance, is the right ordinance, and it's going to serve public safety needs, it's going to protect school zones and things of that nature. You know, the other interesting point is sometimes there's been some suggestions in other communities that hospitals, those might be the best place to put them in. You know what? The hospitals don't want them. The hospitals don't want them because they don't fully recognize medicinal marijuana. The doctors do not. So, I mean, maybe there might be one in Lowell, but maybe they won't. There's only 5 per county, and Middlesex County is a very large county. So, I just wanted to clarify that it's. Maybe we are one of the largest cities in Middlesex County, but that was just my thought. I wanted to
Thank you,
to get that
Councilor
out there.
Elliott.
Thank you.
Councilman, no, go ahead, sir.
Well, I think it's probably typical, 60% somewhat percent of the people vote to have this, but no one wants it next to them, which is, typical, I guess. So, I think all we're talking about here is zoning, to the first speaker's point about all those other issues with schools and healthcare facilities and all that. We're not regulating any of that, right? This is just whether you can locate one here or there or over there. So, I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of a moratorium, especially if bordering communities are doing it. But I think, we should have a clear understanding of what's going to happen, on the 366th day, so that we're not back here then trying to schedule hearings again and all that. I think, we have to start the public hearing process, I assume, for a moratorium if we went down that road, which might take us very close to the end of the year anyway. But my thought would be to refer this back to the Planning Development Department and with guidance from the Law Department, and give us some instruction about what the steps would be to impose a moratorium, and then what the recommendations would be for the regulations that would go into place upon expiration of that moratorium. We have some protections now, right now. I think nothing can come in here without a public hearing, a special permit, which has its own public hearing process. So I don't think we're at great risk right now. But, we hear this all the time, that when it comes to certain types of healthcare facilities, Lowell does its share. And if abutting towns are going to start going down this road, then maybe we should as well, but I think we should go one step further and know what's going to happen. Maybe we do want some of this. Maybe we want the definitions. Maybe we want clarity on the buffer zone. Our buffer zone is 1,000 feet, but it's pretty definitive. The state's buffer zone is 500 feet, but has arguably more places. I would think it would include parks, but that might be a harder thing So I think those issues are worthy of some consideration, what makes the most sense, and what the right zoning districts are, because clearly the planning board had a view that it should be not mixed use and not regional retail. You know, I have the view that maybe high-rise commercial isn't appropriate either. I think everybody agrees residential zones are out. So, you know, maybe that needs a look as well. So that would be my suggestion, that we understand the process to implement the moratorium, but also understand what's going to go in place when that expires, so that we're not caught behind the 8 ball.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Backey?
I frankly think all the suggestions that all the councilors have been making are very, very reasonable ones, and we're happy to help achieve whatever the council is looking for. I did hear mention of one thing in Ms. Doherty's testimony that I think is important, which is this sort of separate and parallel issue of hardship cultivation. The idea that people under certain criteria potentially have the ability to essentially grow their own products or cultivate their own products of medical marijuana. And that seems to be one area where I think the state regulations are actually a little bit unclear and perhaps a little too flexible, maybe, in defining who can qualify for hardship cultivation. There's a 3-pronged test, which is actually an or test, not an and test. So if you meet any one of the 3, you are potentially eligible for hardship cultivation, or the ability to pursue hardship cultivation. And one of those 3 tests is the lack of a dispensary within a reasonable distance of the patient's residence, and the lack of a dispensary that will deliver marijuana to the patient's or personal caregiver's primary address. And the only concern that raises for me in light of the rest of this discussion is if we wind up with a situation where there is not a dispensary relatively close to Lowell, I think we all kind of hope maybe the dispensary is not in Lowell, but close to Lowell, we could be opening the door to people being able to, a fair number of Lowell residents being able to at least make a claim for doing their own hardship cultivation because there was not a marijuana dispensary nearby. I don't know if that's what would happen, but that concerns me, frankly. And that's the one thing that causes me to think that we may not want to delay this too long either. And we may want to make sure we are moving swiftly if there is an interest in trying to regulate this, because I think the dispensary facilities are likely to be very well regulated and very secure facilities, and I think the chances there's going to be a lot of problems around the actual dispensaries is probably less than the chances that there may be some problems around some of these hardship cultivation situations. Potentially. Again, it's all speculation. We don't have any of them at the moment, but that's a concern for me that I think we should all be sensitive to and trying to figure out how to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Backey. Councilor Leahy?
I'm glad you brought that point up, because a few people had mentioned that today about, you know, how much or how many people would be allowed to grow in Lowell in their yards, whether they own or rent, and then there are some safety issues about how much product to be at these dispensaries, but that's a good point, Mr. Backey.
Thank you, Councilor Leahy. You know, with regard to the zoning for this medical marijuana, I know the ordinance, the draft ordinance that we had from the inspection service actually listed a number of zoning, as you have stated. I, for one, prefer if we were to look into it, that to have it in probably like industrial type of zoning. That mean that would take away any other zoning area such as retail, you know, and retail, mixed use, and so on. So limited to one area only, if that is what we going to do in terms of regulated and to certain zoning. But I'll leave it up to the committee and for council to decide on that. But for me, I would concur with Councilor Martin, that is to refer this back to, send this back to the planning board to have, because there's going to be some change in this ordinance that we receive a while back, that is, let's see, December of 2012. Some change to it, including the buffer zone from 500 feet to 1,000, and some of the other zoning that we want out of this would be the, SMU, all this retail and the other mixed use, and I would prefer to have it limited to the light industrial in this matter. Go ahead, Council.
Mr. Bakey, so the state regulations recently adopted, they go into effect when, roughly? Do you have some?
I believe the regulations are in effect, but because they're in the process now of soliciting the actual proposals for facilities, there's no facility being regulated yet. They're in the process now of soliciting the proposals. I don't actually have the dates for when initial proposals are due, and they're going to start actually screening them.
But somebody decides they want to open one of these facilities, they can begin that process now. They need a state license?
Yeah, there's a competitive application, a two-step competitive application process that's described in these regulations to obtain the state approval to be licensed as a marijuana dispensary. And Councilor Elliott was correct about the fact that there can be no more than 35 total, there can be no more than 5 in a county. I do understand that Middlesex County is likely to be a very attractive county because it's got the highest population of any county in the state. Whether that means Lowell's going to be particularly attractive is not clear, but the county itself is, I think, probably a fairly desirable location relative to, say, Nantucket.
And do the applicants need to identify, maybe you don't know this, but do they need to identify a location in their application?
Yeah, part of the application is to identify, well, if the applicant has identified the physical address of the proposed dispensary, the applicant shall provide evidence of interest in the subject property. It's not clear what happens if they don't have a identified location yet. I suppose they can get tentatively approved subject to getting approval for a location.
Okay. All right. Well, my suggestion, again, I think, was to refer this back to, for further report recommendation on the steps needed, both to adopt a moratorium and second, to adopt end regulations at the expiration of that time frame.
Do I hear a second on that?
I'll second that.
Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Chairman now.
Yes.
Counsel Leahy.
Yes.
Counsel Martin.
Yes.
3 yeas.
Councilor Elliott, go ahead. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to Council Martin's point, draft regulations were adopted on March 29th, 2030, and then the second or final were just adopted May 8th, 2013. Law passed on January 1st, or took effect on January 1st, 2013.
Right, thank you. Anything else? Hear motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
What do I say? Adjourn? Aye?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. This hearing is adjourned.